Hello, awesome people. I hope you're having a great day today. Today, we're taking a look at Fletcher Pratt and Sprague de Camp's story that's in this collection that we've been doing a deep dive into called The Complete Enchanter. It's called The Castle of Iron. So we're going to be taking a look at it. It was published in 1941, just the next year after the last two short stories. Literally more like novellas. They're not short. That were in this collection. Now, the first two each took me 3 days for me to knock out, with about an hour and a half each day of reading. So, they were pretty good. This one, the second story was about another half hour long, but I still knocked it out in 3 days. This one was a much longer, 5 day long. It was definitely a longer short story, novella. They call it a novella, but it's like 6 hours long for me to read it. Wikipedia still calls it a novella, but it was like, I've read novels that were shorter than this, and so forth. Here's the collection that we've been doing a deep dive into. I'll link you to it in the comments below. I picked this up when I was doing a sale for used books in State College when I was visiting my aunt and uncle a while ago, and they have this annual used book sale with more than 150,000 used books. Hundreds of people were there when I was there. I had to wait in line for a while until they had enough people coming out to let us in. It's definitely an epic part of state college culture rather. So I definitely did that and enjoyed it, and picked up a few books that we've been doing a deeper dive into it. And I picked up this thing because I wanted to do a deeper dive into these two writers. They're on Gygax's Appendix N as key influences and inspirations on early Dungeons & Dragons, and also as a place to go for inspiration for your own things. Now, Gary Gygax is the guy who created Dungeons & Dragons. And in his 1979 Dungeon Master's Guide, there's an appendix near the end called Appendix N that lists, it's kind of like a reference checklist, but he also says this is a place to go for inspiration too. So I've always wanted to read these two writers. I did read a novel by them that probably about 10 or 12 years ago called The Tower of Xanad. When I was out traveling, I read it in an airport, very short read. And I've always wanted to come back to them and do another pickup. So I picked up this trilogy of novellas. And I'll get out for you. So there you are. Now we finish this up. I have ordered the sequel with two more stories in this collection. I don't know that I'm going to be getting that in enough time for me to knock it out next for you and symmetrically. So I think the next thing that you'll probably be getting are 5 books by Joe Dever and his son and a couple of other editors and so forth. And then we'll probably pick these next two up, although I don't want to promise anything because I definitely am more organic with my reading and so forth. But yeah, that's right. That's where I think we'll be after a 5 books departure from a kid series that I read when I was a kid and loved it. And there's a collector's edition. Actually, it's called the Definitive Edition. And I've knocked about 2 hours from the first novel. That's about 500 pages now. It's definitely pretty cool. It's definitely pretty epic. So that we'll be picking it up next. There's a lot of influences in these 3 books that I've now read by Pratt and Camp, and that are in the Dungeons and Dragons. For example, the key concept of this short story is that we have main characters. In this case, a person whose name is Harold Shea. And he goes to these mythologies and stories and then lives in them and interacts with them and so forth. Okay, in the first book, he solos and goes to Asgard. He tried to go to Irish mythology since he knew Irish mythology, and he thought that might not be that hard, and he winds up in Asgard near Ragnarok. As Ragnarok is approaching, and he interacts with Loki and Thor and Frey and Heimdall and some other things, and does a lot of fun stuff. And that's the first book. The second book, him and his friend Chalmers will go to a series by somebody named Edmund Spenser, and that series is called The Fairy Queen, and that's been out for hundreds of years. It's an epic poem in English mythology and legends and so forth. So they'll go into the Fairy Queen series, and then the next one they're going into a Mohammedan series of works in the third book, and they're taking a third psychologist from their department with them, as well as a cop accidentally. And they will arrive initially at Xanadu's poem, in the poem Xanadu, and then from there, after a chapter, they'll wind up in this story that inspired the Fairy Queen, which is why they're there. They're trying to find some people that they've lost, and so they believe that they're there. And it is a war between Roland from the Song of Roland and the Holy Roman Empire against the Iberian Peninsula that has now become fully Muslim. So it's sort of in the Reconquista era, and that's basically what they're telling. And they're now caught in these battles and this war, and that's what's basically happening. And then again, there are some major characters like Roland is in there. He'll show up. He's a big character. Well, he's probably more of a minor character, but he's there. So you'll come across some other things that Charlemagne's paladins, right, and so forth, and that inspired the Fairy Queen by Spenser. And so that's what we're bringing into. So that's sort of the central sort of, traveling from one legend in each story to another legend, in each story to another legend, and mythologies and mythos into another one, and so forth. And that's kind of what they're doing. They're moving from one to another to another. And that's now there are a lot of influences on the game Dungeons and Dragons that I saw from this. So I definitely think that this might have been read and used. For example, in the first book set in Asgard, there are hill giants, frost giants, and fire giants, which are not only in Dungeons and Dragons, but they're literally called that. They are the exact descriptions, the exact characteristics, the exact power levels. The hill giants are lighter, the fire giants are not as powerful, and so forth. Definitely are coming from this. They definitely seem like they're coming from this, and so forth. So there's that. For example, in the third book, magic is divided into verbal, material, and somatic components, and they're called that. Those are the actual words that are used, and that's sort of the methodology for magic in that area. So you have to gather components, you have to gather somatic phrases, you have to say verbal components, right, and make certain motions with your hands. And those three components are the components for spells in Dungeons and Dragons: verbal, somatic, and material that you have to collect and do in order to cast magic in the Dungeons and Dragons world. And then there are some spells that are so powerful or so interesting that you only have to do one or two of those. And those are definitely more powerful, more interesting. You can do them when you're like, for example, if you're tied up, you can't do a spell that has a somatic component because you're tied up, or a material component if you don't have it with you. But you could do a somatic component only, for example, or sorry, a verbal component only. So these are key parts about the game that you get from the third book, in particular, a methodology of magic. And each of these three books has its own different magic-based system based on those things. Another example is that gunpowder and modern things don't work. For example, in the first book, in the first couple of chapters, he brings with him to Asgard a bunch of things like a pistol, a stainless steel knife, right, a box of world-proof matches, and so forth, and none of these things work. And why not? Because the physics doesn't work. So, for example, in the world of Greyhawk that introduces the game of Dungeons and Dragons in the 70s by Gary Gygax, gunpowder doesn't work. It doesn't work like chemically, and gunpowder doesn't work in Asgard either, or in the others too. It just doesn't work chemically, right? The physics is different in that world. Again, that is a conceit that comes from this series of novels as our modern person is going to these different worlds. So there are a lot of these sort of inspirations in the game of Dungeons and Dragons that I got from this first three books of this series. So I definitely can see the inspiration. I definitely think there's probably some pull from this by him, and there's a reason why this stuff and these two authors are name checked by Gygax, both as an influence on the series as well as a place to go for inspiration, because I definitely can see somebody going to this and saying, well, or build a campaign around this, or I wanted to tell my friends about this, right, and so forth. And so I always wanted to do a deeper dive into these writers. Now this was longer than it needed to be. I gave it 8 to the first one. I gave an 8 minus, a solid 8 to the first one. I gave and this is probably more of a 7 minus. It's definitely longer than it needs to be. It feels like it's probably about 30 or 40 pages too long, it's definitely something I feel. It's probably just too much world building and enough telling and plot that happens in this work. No spoilers, because I don't give any reviews. I'm spoiler free, so I can't tell you why I think that it's too long. But one of the world building conceits that happens here in the plot I think it adds way too much world building and not enough things that happens to it. Hopefully, if you've read it, you want to talk about it in the spoilers. I'd be happy to do it with you. The previous story in this collection, the second one, was nominated for a retroactive Hugo in 2016. And this series was warmly regarded then, and is still fondly received now. This is the 1941 story, The Castle of Iron, and it's definitely novel length, even though they say novella on Wikipedia. So there you go. Have you read The Castle of Iron? What did you think? Would you like to talk about it more in the comments below, whatever your thoughts are? If you enjoyed this, hey, I'd be happy to engage you with it further in the comments below, whatever your take is. If you enjoyed this video, why not hit that subscribe button? There's going to be a lot more of these to follow. And then I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your day and investing it in watching my video. We all have so many things that are happening in our lives, and we're pulled in so many different directions. So the fact that you spent this time with me is incredibly humbling, and I appreciate it. So thanks again. Have an amazing day.